But just to formally start the event.
Yes,
Yes.
fine. Go ahead.
Hi.
Oh,
Thank you guys for coming to Flyleaf and for coming to this event. It allows
who are you? You're the only person who's there.
Yes.
Well, that's right.
I'm Alex. I work here. I actually started working here like a month ago, so
Welcome, Alex.
I'm fresh. But yeah, nice to meet you. And thank you guys for coming. So tonight, you already know, we're going to hear from Michelle about her book, Who We Are Now, Stories of What Americans Lost and Found. Michelle Fishburne is a full-time digital nomad, splitting her time between her 2006 motorhome, Airbnbs, and the occasional house-sitting gig. Aaron Keck is a writer, radio anchor, commentator, comedian, and PhD. He hosts This Morning with Aaron Keck on WCHL Chapelboro. So that's who you're talking to.
Nice.
We hope you enjoy, and we have the book for sale up front if anybody wants. We can also do some signing at the end if anybody wants to do that. So, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
you.
Thanks,
And I'm the
Alex.
token other guy.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
And so what's your name? I'm sorry.
I'm Amy.
Amy. So we have Bob, Mary, Jackie, and Lucy.
Well done.
All right, here we go.
So let's just keep the conversation going because you were talking. We were already talking before we began about how the experience of COVID is different in different places, but also for different individual people within those places. Like just the conversations that we've had.
Yeah.
We all were in different places, but many of us were here in this community, and each individual person experiences it a different way. What is your job like, right? Did you have to continue going to work? Did you lose your job? Do you work from home? Were you furloughed? Do you have kids? How old are they? Do you have childcare? Are you immunocompromised? Like all of these individual things affect very deeply how you as an individual experience this. And I think the thing that I took from this, I wanted to ask you whether you think you got a representative sample of the population of the 300 people you talked to or the 100 people that are in this book. But honestly, any 100 is going to be a representative sample only of those 100 people because everyone
Especially since you
traveled all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, so when I started out doing this, it wasn't supposed to be a book, it was just supposed to be a project so that I could get a job, because I had lost my job in the COVID spring, and I thought I'll do sort of a Humans of New York thing. It'll be Americans of the pandemic. I'll take photos of people, I'll interview them, put it on a website, social media, so then December 2020 I could give it to an employer and say, look what I can make.
Yeah.
And I would have a job, but then people started to say, this is history. And isn't it going to be a book? And that's when I emailed UNC Press, was in December 2020, and they said, yeah, it's a book, right? So everything kind of changed when they said it's a book, because then I felt this higher responsibility to make sure that I did my best to try to make it representative. Now, of course, it can't be representative because everybody's story is truly different. But I did. I had a grid. To make sure that I covered different religions and races and ethnicities and gender, LGBTQ, professions, geographic areas of the country, but also sizes of cities. I even remember going and sort of Googling sizes of the top 50 cities in the United States. And so I created categories. Okay, this is a really big city. We need to have some people from there. And so I had a grid. And toward the end, which was September 2021, if I was missing some stories that I thought, I don't have anybody that fits this, then I would go out on Facebook or I would call people and say, I need somebody to fit this part of the story. So I really did try, but I think it's impossible to have it be representative.
I think that's one of the really cool things about all of the projects that we're kind of seeing people coming out with that are like this, where people, and I mean, you've had so many conversations with folks, and just us sitting around here, you start coming in and immediately telling the story, right? Like you just get on the subject of 2020 and what happened, and people start sharing the stories. And I think a project like this is great because it gives people the space to tell their story, but it also creates an archive of all of the different stories that get told.
And what's amazing is, even so when we started talking with Jackie this evening, and she started to talk about what it was like in Westchester, New York. And right before I got here, I went to Tandem and had a beer. And the woman at the bar said to me, "Oh, well, I lost my job in the COVID spring." And then she just started talking, right? And so when I only had one question that I asked people in this book, and this is the question, and I got really lucky. It's January 1st, 2020. Remember, I started these interviews. I think, Aaron, you were the first.
Was I the first?
You were the first
I know
interview.
you came to me and you said, "I have this idea. Do you want to be the guinea pig?"
He was the guinea pig. It was my first interview, so we've now come full circle.
It was all downhill.
So in August 2020, all cross country.
Right.
So when I interviewed Aaron, I had not stumbled on this question yet, but fairly shortly thereafter I did, and so it was the interview
because
started.
I saw this question, I was like, I don't remember you asking me this. Okay, good.
Yeah. So you okay.
Yep.
So it took me a while to figure out the question, but once I figured out the question, and when you ask people, it's January 1st, 2020, their eyes would go like this because it was like October 2020, it was sort of before times. It's January 1st, 2020, what was your life supposed to be like? And what did it end up being like through to the present? And I ended up becoming so confident in that question that I would say to people, I'm not asking you any follow-ups. There's no other question. And you can talk as long as you want to. And most people talked for 20, 30, 45 minutes. And they just, and I just kept listening. And I don't know if there'll ever be a question that I'll ever come up with again that can elicit that kind of response. So I interviewed Jim Perdue, president of Perdue Farms, and I asked him that question. And when he got done, he said, how long did I talk? And I said, 18 minutes. And he said, that is the longest answer I have ever in my life.
Pick him.
How'd I pick Jim Perdue? Okay, so my
It takes a tough man to make tender chicken.
It takes a tough man to make a tender chicken. Well, so one of the things I learned about the Perdue family credo is what his grandfather, I think, or might be even his father, I think it's in the book, used to say, is that it doesn't matter what we make. It's all about the people.
Interesting.
And so I just was one of those things where I needed somebody from the meat producing part of our country. I'd already talked with farm workers groups, immigrant farmers out in Yuma, Arizona, but I did not have the meat producing part of the story. And so Jim Perdue explained how difficult it was. And one of the things that struck me, so now I'm already delving, like I'm way off
Well, how
the
did you
track.
connect with him in the first place?
My cousin Brian Shane, who helped edit and review all the stories I collected. And by the way, they are in people's own words, but I would get a transcript and then I would figure out the arc of the transcript, and then sometimes there was a sentence that needed to be put in there and then we would send the sort of slightly adjusted story back to the person and say, is this what you said? So Brian was working on that with me, and I said, Brian, I got an issue. And Brian's out on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. He said, well, I can help you with that. And so he just reached out to Perdue, and they said, sure, we'll do it.
Frank, I guess, must have been his father.
Frank was his father.
So that was going to be one of my first questions. Like, how did you decide who to interview? How did you reach out to him?
So when I first start, so number
You
one,
just keep driving.
Where were
to
you
your
when
town.
this-
You say, hey.
when this
Where were
started,
you when this thing started?
I was in Chapel Hill when this thing started.
Why?
So I raised my family here.
Ah,
We moved here, and I also went to UNC Chapel Hill.
okay.
And then I went to UVA Law School, and I was an international trade attorney in DC for a decade. And then I moved back here to raise my family. And
Michelle's one of those people that I actually think is 150 years old. So many things for periods of
160
time. Yeah.
I do feel like I've done so many things. It's
Right?
crazy, right? Like the woman I met at the bar at Tandem right before coming here. She's along with Habitat for Humanity. Oh yeah, I was on the board. Like, and it just seems.
How did you do this?
She's been around.
Yeah.
So I was living in Chapel Hill, and all my travels were based out of Chapel Hill, going up, and I had a senior in high school, just like Jackie had a senior in high school. We had just picked out her prom dress.
Oh.
And I was divorced. And when I lost my job working for a nonprofit in the COVID spring, I submitted 86 customized cover letters, and I was 57 years old. And nobody wanted me. I even offered myself as a 57-year-old free intern. They're like, no, thank you. And so on July 31st, the lease on my post-divorce house was up. And I had no job. And I had tried to get jobs all over the country. And my youngest was going off to college, just like Jackie's was. And so on August 1st, I was going to find myself without a house, a spouse, a job, or a kid to take care of. And so on July 15th, I was in the Target parking lot way out at, wherever we call it these days, South Square or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I was in the car, and I said, okay, you have to decide where you're going to tell the movers to put your stuff. It's like that simple, right? What, you have to call them. They've called you several times. Say, where are you moving your stuff to? You have to decide.
Your kid was able to go to college?
She went to University of Florida. So yes,
Okay.
she was able to go to college because the dorms were open.
Because it's Florida.
Because it's Florida. So I said,
Manage the tuition.
sorry,
How did you manage the tuition?
the tuition.
Yeah.
Savings, right? And that helps. So I was sitting there in that parking lot at Target on July 15th, and I thought, okay, it doesn't make any sense to rent another place because I don't have any idea where I'm going to have to move. But I had homeschooled and road schooled my kids. And so I had a 2006 motorhome. And I had the experience of driving from North Carolina out to Yellowstone, and twice, once for 10 months and once for 4 months, because my parents got bored of retirement and they moved into a motorhome for 7 years and saw all the national parks. So some people were like, oh my gosh, that's so brave, but it's not brave. It's just whatever is already in your lived experience is not brave. You're just using that as an arrow in your quiver, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, I've got the motorhome and I know how to travel in it. And I thought, well, I could go live at Sunset Beach, right? I could bring the motorhome to Sunset Beach, but if I woke up every morning and I was panicked that I wasn't going to be able to get a job, that would be terrifying. Mm-hmm. So I thought, all right, I have to do something, I have to move. It was a run, Forrest, run kind of moment. So I thought I need a project, and I thought about Humans of New York that Brandon Stanton did, where he interviewed about thousands and thousands of people and took their photographs. It's called Humans of New York, and
He's
I thought
still doing that.
Yeah.
he's still doing it. Well, he's doing Humans of the Earth now.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I thought I'll just do Americans of the Pandemic. So I had a project, and then I just started driving. So to your point, how did I find people? I am very naive. And if you go to the UNC Press blog for authors, that's my first sentence. I am often very naive. Because it pretty much takes a naive person to think that they can do a project interviewing people all over America during the pandemic when nobody's out of their houses. So I got out to Withfield, Virginia was my first place, and I was in a campground in September 2020. I started going up to people wanting to interview them, and they're like, "You're crazy, lady, stay away." So then I started reaching out by email to radio hosts and newspapers and museums, people that were essential workers that were still considering themselves as part of the ongoing dialogue. And so I started meeting people.
Essential workers that were also public facing and easy to contact,
right?
Yeah.
Right. So like an education person for the Huntington, West Virginia Museum of Art. Like, how are you doing? How are you connecting with people regarding art education during this? So I kind of hobbled my way out to Cheyenne, Wyoming, And that's when nobody would answer me. And so I looked a little bit east, and I remembered I had done a radically rural conference a couple years back where they had said that Facebook is the new town square. Anything that's happening in the town is happening on Facebook. And so I went on Facebook and I put in Pine Bluffs, Wyoming, and I had seen that they had a kite festival in September 2020. And
What kind of festival?
Kite. And I thought, geez, that's bold. I want to go talk to these people. So I went and spoke with the recreation director, and she said, well, why would you be here talking to me about a kite festival? And I said, do you not understand? The people on the East Coast can't have a kite festival. And then she started connecting me with people in her community. And so I figured out that for the smaller towns, Facebook and a connector was my key. And then for the cities, it was my connections through their connections through their connections is how I filled out the grid.
And people also wanted to talk, right?
So that's Jackie, you're exactly right. People wanted to talk, and one of the things I've been asked in other book events is, do you think that this is replicable? Do you think you can go out there and ask people to sort of bare their souls about a rough period of time and have people say, yes, I'm willing to sit down with you? I'm gonna go out and try it again.
I would guess it probably is replicable.
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah.
People are always willing to talk about
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
And
And where were you when, right? And
No,
where
but not
were you
about
when
2020. I mean, I'm gonna switch topics. The
Anytime.
next book is gonna be a different topic,
But-
but
Everybody knows where they were on
but you
9/11.
think
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm not a Facebooker thing, so I'm hands down, you're great at it, and I just can't get into that whole. I feel like there's lots of time, lots of stuff you have to get through. I don't care for that, but I like the at the end result. Oh, that's cool. All came together. It's so great that you can do that and weed through that mess of constant posting.
It's a little reminiscent of
People do like to talk.
the original Travels with Charlie.
which I did not know about, Bob, until, so I was on my way to Cincinnati, and one of my friends called me and said, oh, so you're doing a Travels with Charlie? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I love Steinbeck, but I did not know about Travels with Charlie. But going back to the
This
night.
is the worst feeling, like, someone has done the exact same thing.
I know.
Yeah. But
Exactly.
they're never gonna
But
help it.
no, but so
There's
the
never
thing
gonna
is,
COVID, right.
Steinbeck is a true author. He's the consummate writer, right? I'm not an author. All I did was cobble together 100 first-person stories, so that's number one, a big difference between Steinbeck and me. Number two, Steinbeck went out in 1960.
64, I think, something like that.
Okay, that might have been when it was published, but I think the actual,
Trip itself. He didn't like the way that America was, and so he set out to see what. And Charlie was his wife's dog.
a
He
big black
took with him.
poodle.
Right.
Yeah.
So I had a dog named Pat, unfortunately, within the past month. So a dog named Buddy, a Shih Tzu, and so it was Buddy and me. So it's Travels with Buddy.
There you are.
But when Steinbeck went out, the bars were full of people, the restaurants,
true.
the festivals, right?
But there was
And
no social media, and there's a different way of connecting and having to a much longer and different sort of process for sure.
there was also
It's
no
very there are a
cell
lot of
phone.
differences.
So what
Yeah.
I did, I don't have it up here, but what I did was I used a transcription app called Otter, Otter,
Mhm.
and it records your audio, and it also records the text. So as you're talking, the text is populating the
goodness.
screen,
Oh, wow.
and
At the
so
radio station, ours
useful.
is called Temi. There's a bunch of them, and they're really good.
Oh.
Yeah.
and this one is free unless you want to have a lot of content, which
So
I
you
did.
just
So
have to
I
be good with all that new stuff, and some of us are very resistant to that.
I was thinking, oh, she's
Or you
got a
have to listen
cassette
to
player
Michelle.
and a microphone.
Yeah.
I
You
like
look like
that.
reel to reel.
That's how I would do it.
Okay, let's
So
start.
I
a
was
tape.
doing it through some antiquated way, and then my friend Charlotte, who did my website, said, Michelle, why don't you just use a transcription app? I said, what?
Because it's too much.
so-
Was that
So I-
Charlotte White?
It was Charlotte, yeah.
Yeah.
Charlotte White
Yeah.
does a great job. So turn on.
Small town, you mentioned one person by their first name. It's like, oh yeah, I know her.
I know her.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I turned it on, and then I just put the phone down.
Yeah,
There was no camera in a person's face.
sure.
There was
That's
no
nice.
mic. There was no
You're not scribbling
lavalier.
notes.
Not scribbling notes. It was just, and then I could lean in and listen, and the person completely forgot.
Sure.
Right? They were just being themselves.
Just downloaded that. That's
There you go.
It's good, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
I can use it.
What was the longest answer you got? Do you know? Do you remember length of longest answer?
I know some of them were 40, 45 minutes.
Ever over an hour? I
No.
could see over an hour.
No, I
Or
think
the
about
next day.
next day.
3 days later.
I think about 45 minutes was the
Ah,
longest. There were a couple people in the medical field who
Oh.
thanked me at the end
Mhm.
and cried
Oh.
because, and I think they actually were the ones who went the longest
Mhm.
because, you know when you go to like a cocktail party or a neighborhood gathering, we all feel like when one person says their thing, you're supposed to come back and it's supposed to be this back and forth and back and forth. So rarely in our society do you say to a person, I'm just going to ask you one question. You go as long as you want, and I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm just going to listen completely to what you're saying.
That's
We
a
don't do
unique
that.
experience for most people.
And I would prefer to have that be my experience when I meet people.
Sure.
To go to a cocktail party and have everybody say, okay, whoever you go talk to next, they're going to listen to you for 15 minutes and just listen. And they're not going to say, oh yeah, I remember when, or like, me too. Like, they're just going to listen to you. So the medical people who really needed to talk, nobody had, not through any fault of other people, but they had never said, so how did it go? And just say, I'm not going to ask you anything else.
And it couldn't have been more terrifying for one particular group, right? Because they went to work every day not knowing what they were going to face, and they had no choice.
And then in the summer of 2021, I was hired by a group called Panorama Global, a think tank, to do a study of 50 public health officials, public health workers, and healthcare workers about what they sort of need to get better at, what they did wrong at the beginning of the pandemic, and how they should prepare themselves better for the next one. And then also some subpart questions. And that was, so not only do I have the 300 people I interviewed casually as I wandered across or zoomed across America when I was trying to fill out my grid, but I also have these 50 people who, let's just put it this way, some of the public health officials who were at Ground Zero on day one in the biggest cities in America, I'm not allowed to disclose because of that project who it was, but I heard from the people who were at Ground Zero in our biggest cities.
Amazing.
What was the most impactful conversation?
So the most impactful conversation is one that's not in the book. Because it touched me in a way that helped me understand why I liked us better during the pandemic. So I'll unpack that. I was in Marfa, Texas. Well, it's between Marfa and Alpine, Texas, out in the middle of nowhere. It's one of those places where you have to call your kids and say, if you can't reach me for the next 2 hours, it's because I have no cell phone
They've got a
service.
Prada outlet there. How,
They do, but it's not real, and you know that.
How out of the way could this be?
So I was just in the outskirts of Marfa, and I was a little low on my air in my tires. And I saw this gentleman who parked on the side of the road with a pickup truck, and I said, "Hey, do you know where I can get some air for my tires?" He said, "Well, I've got a generator in the back of my pickup truck, and I can go ahead and fill it up." I said, "That sounds great." His name's Calvin. So So we started talking, so why are you out here? What are you doing? And Calvin was from Alpine, Texas, and he had a ranch, and people could go out there and hunt and shoot, and they had cabins to rent, and he did a couple other things as income streams, but they all were outside related. And he said, he said, I'm doing fine, and business is really good, and I feel badly about that. And he said, I just keep wondering what it must be like to be, because I keep wondering how the New York City restaurant owners, Jackie, are doing.
The former New York City.
The person
There you go. So I said to him, so I was talking to Calvin on February 3rd or 4th, and I had just interviewed over Zoom Dominic Sanino from Mimi's Restaurant from Manhattan on January 31st. And Dominic had been telling me that he was still not allowed to have anybody eat in his restaurant, and that he was taking a financial bath, and he was pretty angry. And so when I told Calvin that, Calvin nodded and he said, that's what I was worried about. He said, will you please, if you ever talk to him again, will you please let him know that a rancher in Texas is thinking about him?
Oh, wow, what a good name. Huh.
So Jackie just said, for those of you who did not hear, Jackie just said, what a good man. And I think that's why I like this better during the pandemic, because I think that even if people's lives were not really changed at all by the pandemic, I think in that pause, every single one of us on the planet, all of us, really paused and thought about other people for a little bit longer than we usually do. And I thought that was pretty lovely.
Sure. I talked with a lot of folks for my own project for the radio station, which I don't know if you've been listening, aired over the last 3 weeks. Multiple people came back to the same exact Dickens line about it having been the best of times and the worst of times, right? Like you saw the worst in people. You saw people who resisted and denied and pushed back and got really nasty, and you also saw a lot of the best, like a lot of people. You saw it here in this community with just the ingenious ways that people would come up with to help each other, and you spoke with several people. The anti-sewing group that had
right, but we were to talk about this area, but I want to start two things. Yeah. One, the World Happiness Report just came out last month, and they said that the world's happiness level was remarkably resilient during the pandemic. They also said that they have found that crises make us kinder.
Yeah.
Oh. Crises
make us kinder, that we tend to be more kind during periods of crises, and that is what they attribute the fact that our happiness level was resilient even during the worst of the pandemic, which was kind of interesting. So, worldwide report just came out. But how people were thinking about each other. So let's talk about this community just for a minute, because there's so many good stories. Kevin Callahan from Acme Food and Beverage.
Yep.
So in Carborough, he was thinking, now this is over spring break. Now this is still when we didn't have the long view. Mm-hmm. This was still
we're going to be out of business for 2 months. What are we going to do?
So he thought, well, a lot of people had to cancel their spring break plans. So he has a very, very long listserv. So he sends out an email. He says, I know a lot of you had to cancel your spring break plans. We'd like to help sort of make up for that somehow by let us know what you were supposed to do, and we'll try to do cuisine nights for takeout. That would, Italian, like a dude ranch. So that's what Kevin,
idea.
Isn't that fun?
Huh.
I know.
I never heard of that.
Yeah.
And then up in Hillsborough, Yonder Bar was getting slammed financially because they couldn't have anybody inside even for the longest time, because they were not even a restaurant but a bar, right? So it was even worse for them. But people were wanting to take walks, and so they had this sort of pass-through area at the front of the store where you could pick up 6-packs and all. But they created wine slushies, and they found buzz balls. I think buzz balls came out during the pandemic or something like that, or became.
It's a little sphere of alcoholic slushy, right?
Yeah, it's glass and it's like rounds. It's cute.
Yeah.
And so they had buzz balls and wine slushies, and that's what kept them afloat.
No pun intended.
No.
Exactly.
Fair enough.
Well, the end of the story of the Casual Pint, just down.
No, I
just down
don't.
the road
I
on
don't.
Elliott Road, exactly the same thing, but kind of in reverse. They're a beer bar, like just belly up to the bar. They've got 80 taps, and they sell bratwurst, and then there's TVs, and that's it. It's the bar, and they sell beer. And that's
What
it.
else does
They have
man need?
just opened, exactly,
Fair
right?
enough.
As it turns out, there is one more thing that man needs because they had to shut down. They could only do takeout. We were always allowed to do takeout, but that was it. And you can't go up and get a pint to go. I think you can now in the social districts, but they weren't able to do that, so they couldn't stay open. What do? And they found this company out of Virginia called Nightingale that sold ice cream sandwiches. Gourmet ice cream sandwiches. Like
So this
really
speaks
good
to
ones.
creative entrepreneurship.
They transformed
Making
into a
special mess.
into
so
a
whatever
family
it is
restaurant
to keep things
overnight.
alive and go. And
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And now it's fascinating because if you go to the Casual Pint, they're back open again, they're doing great, they're thriving, and their clientele is now almost exactly 50-50 between people going to have a pint and watch the game, and then in would walk a family with like 3 small kids, 4, 5, 6 years old, and get their ice cream sandwiches and go.
It's amazing. They still sell it. It's great. They still sell it.
Oh yeah, it's the top selling item on their menu now. It still is.
But that's one of the things that excites me though about where we came through in the pandemic is that in the scarcity, companies, etc., people found areas to extend themselves or abundance or Sadie Rock and the Mad Bryans, right? So
Local musician.
Locals musicians. So Sadie was about to do her first national tour with the band.
But she's like what, 18? She's really young.
Well, she's more like 26 now.
Is she more? Oh my god.
Oh,
She's
sorry.
been for years.
Yeah, so
Maybe 26 going on 18.
26 going on 18. I was talking with a coworker of mine who said he was 27. I'm like, I could have sworn you were like 23. Anyway, Sadie Rock.
we're getting older.
Yeah.
So yeah, we
National
homeschooled with their
Geographic,
family.
I turned 87.
so they were gonna-
Oh wow.
How I view the world.
I would have thought 18, 19.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Having one is a good thing.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
Including a hell of a party over the weekend.
Every day your feet are on the floor.
There it
That's
is.
a good one.
So Sadie started trying to do the virtual shows on the deck of their backyard, and she has some profanity in some of the songs, and so they had to figure out how to deal with that because the neighbors could hear, right? But they started picking up followers in Australia and Europe, other countries, and so I asked her, and this is really early, was like August 2020, do you think that when you go forward, you will, even when you can do it in person, we haven't talked about the word hybrid yet, do you think you will still try to have like this live stream? And she said, yeah, like if we have an audience in Australia, I wouldn't want to stop not having an audience in Australia, right? So this hybrid thing, like I was doing a book event with Malaprops in Asheville, and it was virtual, and I said, did you do this before the pandemic? Not really. And so why are you doing it now? Well, why wouldn't we, right? So we found extensions.
There were some good things that came out.
Yeah, sure. Kids U Children's Museum, which is in University Place Mall in Chapel Hill. Children's Museum. So if you've ever been to a children's museum, it's all hands-on interactive. Like you get into the exhibits and you're touching them and you're using them and you're interacting with them. And they had a website, but they never used it. It says, here's our website, here's our hours of operation, here's a picture of some of our exhibits, and that's it. They transformed again almost overnight into an online museum because A, you couldn't have people come, and B, even when you could, you can't be touching the same things as other people, and now the online presence is as strong or
Some
stronger than
things
the
will
in-person.
never go back.
Yeah.
Some things will never go back.
Yeah.
By the way, I was the third member of the board of Kids Zoo.
Were you?
Yeah,
Okay.
so I've been
So
here a
you know
long
exactly.
time.
Yeah.
I'm the board, one of the board chairs right now.
You were the board chair as a Kids Zoo?
Right now.
Yeah.
Oh,
You look, you're so familiar. We have kids the same age?
23 and 20? No?
No, but I own the yard shop.
Are you right next to Whole Foods?
No, I used to be, but now I'm Mary Caucus Plaza.
Okay.
But it could be just being on boards and seeing.
Yeah, all that stuff, being part of a community. So that's one of the, that was one of the great things about the question that I asked. Is when I went out in September 2020, remember we had an election that year.
No.
And I, being in Chapel Hill, I wasn't too sure if the country I was heading out into was going to feel safe or welcoming, or if it was going to be very different. It had been very changed. And my mom, who's a wise woman, kept saying, stay away from politics, Michelle, stay away from politics. And the great thing about that question that I asked is January 1st, 2020. What was your 2020 supposed to be like? And what did it end up being like through the present?
Oh, fun.
People, when you ask them about what matters to them, they talk about their family. They talk about their friends, their community, like kids do. They talk about their faith, their hobbies. And hardly anybody mentioned anything about an election or politics because it wasn't what was at their core. It didn't matter.
The survival didn't matter, right?
Well, and what really matters to
affect our lives. I
it
mean,
doesn't. And
it's
after
on
so many of the interviews, people would say to me, they'd lean into me afterwards, they're like, is it off? Yeah, it's off. So how are people doing out there? Like, I really want to know, like, is it what I see on the news? Is it that bad? And then I'd say, it's actually not. Because that's not what I found.
people
and-
just went on with their lives with some changes.
That's right.
But other than that, and some good changes. as
Good
it turns out for
changes.
most people. Have you ever thought of doing this internationally?
So I don't know what's next for me, Bob. I really don't yet. As we said at the top of this right before we turn this on, is who we are now. Right now, just a few years out from when this started, there are some people who are interested in talking about it, but not a lot. But I know that 7 years from this spring, when we're doing our 10-year anniversary, I'm going to be a busy lady because everybody's going to want to talk about it. But between now and then, I think I found another set of questions I want to ask. So I'm trying to decide if I'm going to get out in the motorhome again and go do this again and have another Who We Are Now. I think I want to do one more in the United States before I do one abroad. But I want this to be a series. I really enjoy asking people a question and saying, the floor is yours. Just talk for as long as you want. And you know one thing about people, if you let them talk for as long as you want, you will always find so much in common with them.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know if you find that, Aaron. You interview people all the time.
I usually do, yeah. My problem is when you're listening to a conversation live on the air, usually an 18-minute answer will get a little bit tedious after a while. I'm not actually engaged in the conversation, so I'm required to interject every
That's
so
true.
often.
That's true.
We did have a 5-minute answer earlier this week. And I was like,
That would be a lot,
Yeah.
you're right.
It was.
That would be a lot.
The format.
It was a great answer, but yeah.
I'm thinking of it just reminds me of, I had a flash of a book I read many years ago, Psychologist Steps. Is it the workplace or work?
What's it called?
Is it Steps?
Oh yeah, Studs Turkle. Working.
That's Turkle.
Oh, start
Oh,
working,
yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, that's what this reminds me of. Just these little snippets of what their
Vignettes,
job's
yeah.
about.
Yep,
That's a brilliant book as well. And that was-
It is, and
Long
I didn't know
time
about
ago.
Studs Turkle or working. So my editor at UNC Press said, "Oh, so you're doing a Studs Turkle?" And I'm like,
No,
"I
I'm doing
don't
Travels
know.
with Charlie.
I don't. I'm so
But I just
confused."
learned about that yesterday.
Yes.
But I didn't know who Studs Turkle was either because I graduated from UNC as a political scientist.
Yeah.
I went on to be an international trade attorney, then a homeschool mom. Like I wasn't steeped in this
Yeah, I
kind
think he
of
was
work.
a sociologist. So Yeah, it was a long time ago, but that was a great. I just remember thinking, what a great book, and it reminded me of what you were doing, interviewing different people, and let them talk about what they do. That just worked.
So one of the things that oral history apparently is at a crossroads right now. There are the traditionalists who say you have to say at the beginning of the story, like what their house looked like, what their education was, what their gender, their race, their ethnicity, their age is. You have to put all that at the front, or else you haven't done a proper oral history. And then you have to do the oral history a certain way, which makes it, to some extent, not as accessible.
It might be very interesting to read that at the end.
Yeah, at the end.
After I've seen what someone said. Oh, that's...
And so what I did was, I was told by another oral historian, what you're doing, Michelle, is a little bit more like what sort of modernists, as it were, want to do with oral history, which is to make it accessible to people. You don't provide the whole transcript, you find the arc. And so in my book, you have one pull-out quote at the top right-hand corner that gives you a sense of, okay, this is what this story is about, because it's 100 snippets, and you feel like you're tumbling through the pandemic as the little pull-out quote gives you a sense of, okay, palate cleanser, okay, this is what this one's about. And so then you see the person's name and what their sort of profession is, or their role, like homemaker or whatever. And then you read the story, and at the end you see the state and the date, and that's it.
That's great.
And there are no photos. And I have the photos, and at first we thought we were going to do photos, but then one of the peer reviewers, because if you have an academic book, it has to be peer reviewed, called it elegiac, which means poetic. And I thought, wow, it wouldn't be poetic if it had people's photos in it. And then I started to think that it would stop you, like, oh, I don't look like that person, so their story is not as relevant to me, right? So I'm not calling out anybody I know. I'm not gonna use names. I have a group of friends.
How hard is that, though? I mean, I applaud you because I get stuck in my own head. Like, oh, we could do this, and you go off on a tangent. You go, but you somehow just pulled it together.
I pulled it together,
and you don't worry about I left this out maybe, or that out, or I could have done this and that, because then it never gets published.
That's true. That's true. And so I decided no photos. And then when I did this book group with some friends, and one of my friends said, I really wish you had photos. Like, I don't judge people, and I could have handled the photos. And I was like, oh, okay. Now, she's the only person in the group who said this. And I love you if you're listening. Then I put up a photo of somebody who's in the book. And I swear to God, it was this instinctive. She went, that's not what he looks like. Like, it was literally just the arm just went out instinctively and stood out like, stop. And then she left it out there and said, no, that is not what he looks like. And then she looked at all of us. She's like, oh my God. I thought I wasn't going to judge. And I just did it. And then she looked at me, she said, that was a good idea not to have the photos in the book.
It's kind of better that you have in your head.
It's better that you have
Who you
it.
think they are.
That's always been the case. I mean, you listen to somebody's voice on the radio, and you have no idea. You clearly know what they look like, except they don't.
Until you show it.
Right, except they don't.
Yep.
And then another thing, too, is we thought about an audiobook, and UNC Press was assuming we would do an audiobook. And then I realized, and that would have been financially remunerative to do it. A lot of people don't want to read the physical book these days. Then it occurred to me, almost everybody in the book is still alive. So it's hard to say that sentence. And I wouldn't want to have an audiobook narrator be Dominic in New York City, and be a gun shop owner in Texas, and be I didn't feel like I could honor the people and keep the trust bond with the people that I interviewed, and have somebody pretend to be them. And so there's no audiobook.
But there's a thing these days I've heard that just interviews in their own voices, their own families, a collection like that. could be a possibility, or maybe like a portion of the book. Or it could be audio, and you could go to this link and hear an actual interview in their own voice.
That's true, and
That
I
would
can
be
bring
another
those forward.
interesting thing for your series if you continue.
One of the things I'm thinking is that before the 10-year anniversary of the lockdown, that I might go ahead and, closet myself in whatever sound room, and I'll do them.
Exactly. You're the only person who could do it. Exactly.
There are different ways.
I was going to ask if you reached, you did to send it to each individual person and say, here's the transcript, is this correct? But how many follow-ups have you done with these books? Because you could always reach out to them and say, we're doing an audiobook, can you record your piece?
Oh,
That would be cool.
That'd be really cool.
4 ways to do it.
I love that.
But a serious amount of work.
Great idea.
All right, we're done. Good
There-
night.
okay.
Complicated, but,
No, you're absolutely right. That's how it should be done.
Mhm.
We should have each person record their own.
but they might not be as spontaneous as they were when they talked to you.
But
Yeah,
they'd be
not-
reading
but
it.
they could read
They're
it.
They read
different
it.
Yeah.
people now
They
than
could read it.
were.
That could actually be
First
the
day.
next series.
There you go.
Mm.
So my next
Interviewing
series.
them again.
So what I'm thinking about the next series, as we all know, there's another election coming up.
Yay.
I'm sorry for us that we don't have like longer periods between elections because it's just getting too short. But and so I'm thinking about going
Well,
out.
China's fixed that.
I'm trying to fix that.
Very long
Yeah,
period
maybe it's
of
better to have
elections.
elections more frequently. But you know what? I don't know how we're doing on time. We should
I've
open.
been keeping, we've got 8 minutes. So.
But we should open it up to questions maybe.
Radio guys have a clock in their.
I've been, I hope no one has paid too much attention to the fact that I've been surreptitiously checking the phone the whole
Well,
time
you
just
did
to
a
make
great
sure that we
job.
stay on time.
So we should open to questions because I don't want to presuppose what people want to know. So, you guys have questions?
I would like to agree.
Please.
I've got 2 for when we're done. but,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering with the election coming up, would your idea be to have that as part of what you're doing? Or it seems like you were able to kind of pierce through the madness of the election with the first book. And that sounds really appealing to me.
Stay away
Is that
from
what you wanna
politics,
do?
Michelle. I agree with your mother.
So what I'm thinking of, is number one, to have people talk to you, you have to have something that's fairly benign. And so, I think when I go out, I'm going to be looking at several different Who We Are Now books. One question will be basically, you're 9 years old. It's a July day. Tell me what your day was like when you were 9 in the summer. Starting with getting that.
I just wrote a story in my head, of course.
Right? So
Yeah.
it's the same kind of thing where you bring yourself back and it's very concrete. And I thought about summers because school's kind of the same in a way. Summer's different. Right? So I thought about starting with that. And then the next question would be, how do you feel about how America's doing, and are you worried about where we're headed and why? So that would be kind of, I know, so Bob's making a grimace, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. But then the next question is really what I want to get at, which is, and you and I have already tried this. I already did guinea pigged you on this
That's
one
right.
too,
Yeah.
which is, do you have a label that you think a stranger or somebody who thinks of people like you would use about you? Number one. How does that label make you feel?
What do you mean by that?
Like,
An example.
upper class white woman.
Oh.
Okay. How does that label make you feel? And what do you want people to know about you?
Oh.
So, because I'm trying to get a little bit under I think we are jumped to labels too quickly with each other, and we're using that as a soundbite, and I don't know if it's helping us as a society. And so I wanted to sort of, as you were talking about getting under the radar, kind of curious about a way to try. So I'm not too sure. This is just, 2 weeks old, this thought, but that's what I'm thinking about.
I think it's a great idea. If you asked me that, I would immediately start to give you adjectives about me, not a label per se. Does that make sense?
Okay,
Like I
so,
would say sociable or like those kinds of things versus
which is actually what you did
a
too,
class.
in a way.
Is it? I
Mhm.
literally can't remember.
Actually,
I
that
think
would
if
be
you
an
ask me that
question.
question
What are
10 times
what are
on 10 different days, you get 10 different
right?
responses.
What are adjectives that describe you?
Okay. Okay.
Hmm.
All right, other questions? You're welcome to do a follow-up.
Well, I don't know if everybody is interested in my questions, because I'm writing a book too. And it's actually kind of an amazing pandemic book in a sense. So I have questions about like UNC Press and websites and things like that, which might be for after.
Yeah, we'll do that after. That sounds good. Okay.
Before we end, you have to tell the story about the rock.
Oh, I have one question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Were you scared to travel alone?
No, and I think that I wasn't scared to travel alone, and I think the reason being is because, once again, what I was saying about when you've already had a lived experience that you've already integrated. So when I went out in 2006 with my 4-year-old and my 7-year-old in the motorhome and drove a month out to meet my parents on the road for a 10-month trip, that was brave.
But you had kids.
Yeah.
Which
might have made it even braver, right? Like a 4-year-old and a
Next time you're
7-year-old.
really by yourself, right?
And me, just me, right? So I wasn't. I had already done it, and I only did commercial campgrounds, and I felt
sorry.
very safe.
Right.
felt
I meant more like, were you scared, like, what if your car broke down? Or, like, not necessarily were you scared about other people harming you, but, like, just being alone in general. Like, late at night, you have a flat tire.
Well, it wasn't. My parents always said, don't drive at night when you're in a motorhome because that's when mistakes happen and accidents happen.
Right.
So no, I really had no fear. Once again, I started the UNC Press author blog with, I'm often very naive, and that probably helps.
I was thinking the other way.
I remember-
Chutzpah.
Yeah, it's admirable.
No, it's
It's
not.
chutzpah,
So
for sure.
no, it's so one time. So when I was a lawyer in Washington, I was in there on a Sunday working,
That's a lot.
and I was bringing a memo to a partner's desk around 6 p.m. at night, and somebody moved, and I saw the motion, and I turned around. It was somebody who should not be in this law firm, and I said, "Hey, so what are you doing?" Da, 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 da. We had this chat, and I said, "You really aren't supposed to be here. Let me walk you outside, out to the elevators." Out the, locked doors. And then I came in the next morning, and like 2 of the floors had been wiped out of all the computers.
Oops.
Wow.
And I hadn't called the police because this person looked differently than me, but I wasn't, and he had a plausible story. I wasn't gonna call them. So the police came in, and anyway, got around the firm that Michelle had met this person, and. And so they said, you either get an A for courage or a D for judgment. And really,
or an F for not calling the police.
right, and you know what, Jackie, it's a D for judgment. I'm just
That's an amazing skill.
I tumble through life.
It's an amazing skill.
I don't know if it's an amazing skill, it's just kind of.
Many of us.
I mean, you did describe yourself as Forrest Gump already. So
Yeah,
there's no
that's
tumble
true.
through life movie that's more emblematic than
Yeah,
that.
no, I'm kind of Forrest
You
Gump.
also do have a guy in this book who decided to just run all over the place. So.
I did. Arkansas running man,
Yeah.
Nate Thomas. He decided, he's from Forest City, Arkansas. They had this discussion around March 13th about community discussion about what was about to happen and shutting things down. And they thought, well, everybody's going to want to have somebody to rally them. And Nate's a veteran, and he is a runner, and he loves his country. And so Nate ran all over Arkansas with Old Glory, as he calls her, up on a pole. And Arkansas running man.
That's a cool story.
That's a great story.
So this is a trust of your readers need to trust without fact checking that you can have quite the imagination and make
Here
these
come the
stories as well. Just
Well,
gonna say.
yeah, so no, these are all real people. These
I'm
are
sure they
all.
But it's a trust factor there.
That's
I totally
true.
believe you.
That's true.
But how do we know? And it doesn't really matter to me because it's a great story, and I'm sure there are people out there to represent it anyway.
If you have that good of imagination, it still works.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean, I can vouch for
And there's
what? How many
probably
people
somebody
in this
just
book
like
do
that.
I know? 4. I know State Senator Valerie for sure. Comedian Jeremy. I did improv with him.
There you go.
You know
Anyways, it
Jackie
wasn't a
Pope,
blank thing,
who's
it's
a
just
salon lofts woman,
Yep.
who raised $4,500
That's a
for
brilliant
a
business,
table.
business idea.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah, it's
It
great.
was so lovely. And then, there's somebody else in there from.
There was someone else from Chapel Hill, but not someone I knew. So
Oh, so they don't exist.
well,
No, I'm kidding.
I can't vouch for them though. Like, I don't know. They could have been made up. I'm not sure.
Just kidding. But it's an interesting thing, yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's great.
you.
Yeah.
I want to get the book.
So did you have any last question for me?
Talk about the rock garden real quick. First of all,
Oh,
it's a great ending.
okay. So when I was around 27, I was in Palm Desert in a hot tub, and the sun was setting, and there was a young woman who was dating one of the leading artists of the day from San Francisco, and there was a man who was in his 60s who had spent his life trying to cure cancer. And there was nobody else around, and it was very quiet. And he said, I want to tell you a story. Okay. He said, it's a story about a rock garden. There was this young couple who was very much in love, and they were on this wonderful trip, and they went to this cliff, sort of imagine Cliffs of Moher, like just kind of craggy, UK shoreline. And there was this rock garden on the top, and there were all these tourist buses, and it's a very famous place, and this couple walks around hand in hand and looks at all the rocks, and said, it's a beautiful setting, there are a lot of rocks. What's the big deal? So they go to the rock garden keeper, and they say, what's the big deal? And he says, well, no matter where you stand, you can't see all the rocks.
Huh.
And so the couple walks around hand in hand, and sure enough, you can't see all the rocks, but by and by, they kind of drop hands, and they kind of each wander, and they find themselves at opposite ends of the rock garden. And then when they look up and they see each other, they realize that between the two of them, they can see all the rocks.
Oh, that's really
And so
interesting.
when I was on my trip, at one point I said to my 20-year-old, I think I'm doing my rock garden. And she said, didn't you really know?
Crazy.
Lovely.
Thanks, everybody. This was beautiful. I really like how you came into each other.
Yeah.
It turned into a real conversation.
It did. It did. Thank you for letting us do it like this.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
I need to get the book.
Well, books are for sale over there.
Right, and I'm happy to sign them, and Alex, I'll sign more.
Yeah.
And I figured out, so the way I sign them, I write now, Michelle Fishburne, it's all about the people we meet along the way.
Well, here's sort of an idea. My older son also wrote a book called Chasing Charlie. And what he did was he followed the Steinbeck route.
I know that book. That was your son?
That's Michael, yeah,
No way.
for goodness sake.
I mean, I know the book because like, oh, that's so cool that he did that.
Yeah, he started out in Steinbeck's little cottage in Long Island.
Wow.
Small world.
Wow. Where does he live?
Fairfield, Connecticut.
If I'm ever up in Fairfield, Connecticut, I'll
Well,
have.
absolutely. Well, I was thinking about your book to send to him.
That would be great.
Well, I think so.
Yeah.
Fairfield's a lovely place.
It is a lovely place.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you so
Nice
much.
to meet
Yeah.
you.
Everybody.
It's sort of it's maybe with.
Yes, and Jackie, thank you for recruiting for this evening.